Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is Rabbi Harel, and today is the 28th of June, 2025. This is a sermon on Parasha Korach, which means Korah. And it comes from Numbers chapter 16 through 18. And I named it The Authority of God and the Humility of the Messiah. So before we start, I would like to just open this time in prayer. Abba Father, thank you again for the opportunity and privilege we have to be in your presence, simply because of what Yeshua has done for us. I ask that everything that comes out of my mouth be for your glory, guided by your Ruach HaKodesh, your Holy Spirit. And I ask you to give us eyes to see again, ears to hear, hearts to understand, minds to understand. In Yeshua's name, Amen. So, again, Shabbat Shalom. Parasha Korach basically deals with dramatic rebellion against God's appointed leadership. Korach, who is a Levite, along with a couple of his friends, Dathan and Abiram, and 250 chieftains, they all challenged Moses and Aaron. And their argument sounds fairly spiritual. He says all the people are holy, but their motives reveal pride and self-exaltation, basically. So, as we know, this is a world who's obsessed with self-promotion, individualism, believing in oneself, etc., etc. Korach's pride might sound righteous to some people, but in this parasha reveals a deeper truth that true leadership is about humble obedience to God's call, not self-appointed glory. Okay, and that's what this world seems to be about, definitely these days. Ultimately, it points us, though, to Yeshua, the Messiah, who modeled servant leadership and not rebellion. Okay. So where does the nature of rebellion come from? This comes from Numbers chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. It says, "You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them." Numbers chapter 16, verse 3. So Korach tries to cloak his rebellion in spiritual language. That's what Hasatan does, right? He claims to be defending equality and holiness, but his heart is filled with jealousy and ambition. He resents Moses and Aaron's God-ordained authority. Like I said, this tends to mirror Hasatan's rebellion in heaven. If you think about it, Lucifer also was in a place of high privilege. He was one of God's favorite angels. I mean, he was the one in charge of the choir, and the music. Yet he sought a throne above God. This is found in Isaiah 14, verses 13 through 14, for example. So in application, we need to look at our own hearts and ask ourselves, do we sometimes resist spiritual authority out of pride? Are we submitting to God's order, or are we seeking position and recognition? Korach's rebellion warns us not to confuse giftedness with calling. We all have gifts from the Ruach HaKodesh, right? We all have gifts from God. But we're not all called to do something specifically fantastic, maybe like being a preacher, for example, or other things. We need to ask God what he's calling us to do. That is important. The second part I want to talk about is God's response and vindicating his chosen, right? Those he has chosen. So in Numbers 16, verses 5 through 11, and also verses 28 through 35, Moses tells Korach and the rebels to bring censers with incense. Only one offering out of all those will be accepted by God. So this moment basically exposes the pretty deep truth. Like only God chooses who serves in what role. Okay, we don't get to choose this. If we think we have a calling in something, or God has chosen us for something, we need to make sure first that that's what he wants. And it's okay to ask him to confirm. Okay. So the earth swallows the rebels. That must have been quite the sight. And the fire consumes the other 250 men. So it's a terrifying display of divine judgment, but also a defense of God's holiness. He's not going to put up with things like that. So in a Messianic insight, Aaron's priesthood, which is repeatedly challenged, is a shadow of the eternal high priest, Yeshua. Just as God defended Aaron's role, He confirmed Yeshua's priesthood with resurrection power when he was raised from the dead, found in Hebrews chapter 5, verses 5 through 6, for example. Another part I want to talk about is the fruit of true leadership and intercession. So this is found in Numbers chapter 16, verses 46 through 48. So after judgment falls, all right, this people still keep complaining and murmuring, and the plague begins. But Aaron runs with incense and stands between the dead people and the living people, and the plague is stopped. This is an act of not terrorism, act of intercession, and it's very profound. The very man who was challenged by the people themselves puts his life on the line in order to save them. Maybe he could have been killed by his other two sons earlier when they offered unauthorized incense. But he tried, and it was okay. Yeshua, our great high priest, also did the same. We could think about it. While we were still sinners, he died for us. He intercedes even now at the right hand of the Father, and this is found in Romans 5:8 and Hebrews 7:25. How do we apply this to our lives today? Are we willing to intercede for those who oppose or misunderstand us even, or mistreat us? True spiritual leadership is marked by self-sacrifice and not control, okay? I've had many people speaking against me, saying things about me. It's okay. I will let God deal with them. I do not need to defend myself. I did not put myself in this position. I did not ask for it. So we need to remember that. The fourth part I want to talk about is confirming God's choice and how Aaron's staff buds. This is found in Numbers chapter 17. So in order to settle this dispute, God commands each tribal leader to place his staff in the tent of meeting. Only Aaron's staff, representing the tribe of Levi, buds, blossoms, and produces almonds. That must have been pretty wild. So this supernatural sign confirms God's choice. In the same way, Yeshua's resurrection is a definitive proof of his identity and priesthood, found in Romans 1:4. As a messianic parallel, Aaron's staff, which is dead wood, and it was made alive. There's no way a dead staff is going to do all this by itself, right? Foreshadows resurrection life. Yeshua, crucified and buried, rose to new life. His priesthood is not based on lineage alone, but on the power of an indestructible life. Hebrews 7:16. The fifth part I want to talk about is the responsibility of holiness, found in Numbers 18. God here reaffirms the responsibilities of the priests and the Levites. Holiness brings not only privilege, but deep responsibility here. Okay? They are to bear the iniquity of the sanctuary, guard its holiness, and live off the offerings of the people. So, in application for us as believers in Yeshua, we are called a royal priesthood in 1 Peter 2:9. But that does mean more than privilege. It means living lives of purity, service, and intercession. Okay? Not all these weird things that people are saying, who are preaching out their prosperity and this and that. Okay? God can give prosperity, or he may not give prosperity. I know many believers in Yeshua who are struggling. And it might be something they've done, or just simply what their life is about. He said you will have trouble. All right? So, in conclusion, I want to talk about choosing the way of the Messiah and not choosing the way of Korach. Korach wanted the glory of leadership without the submission that it requires. Yeshua, though equal with God, because he is the Son of God and he is God, himself, he emptied himself. He took the form of a servant and humbled himself to death, even on a cross. This is found in Philippians 2, verses 5 through 11. He could have easily said, no, I don't want to do this. Korach descended into the earth in judgment. Yeshua descended into the grave in obedience and then rose in glory. So I would like to challenge us all to walk in the humility, obedience, and servant-heartedness of the Messiah, Yeshua. Let's reject the spirit of Korach, striving, competing, grasping, and instead embrace God's call to serve, submit, and to love. As some final questions, what motivated Korach's rebellion, and how can we discern between righteous protest and prideful ambition? How does Aaron's intercession foreshadow Yeshua's priestly ministry? In what ways can we walk out our calling as a royal priesthood in practical terms? And how does the blossoming staff point to Yeshua's resurrection? What does it mean for our own spiritual life, even? And what safeguards can we build into our community to foster humility and resist division? There are some other study questions. Like I said, what were the root causes of Korach's rebellion? We find this in Numbers 16, verses 1 through 3. How do jealousy, ambition, and pride play a role? Remember, pride is the very first sin that was ever committed by Lucifer. So, in what ways might these same attitudes show up in our congregations or our personal lives? Korach's argument is that all the people are holy. Why is this statement both true and at the same time misleading? We can compare Exodus 19, verse 6 with 1 Peter 2, 9. And how does this relate to God's order and authority? Can we honor both the priesthood of all believers and God's appointed roles? The third question is, how does God confirm his chosen leaders in this parasha? Consider the outcomes of the censers. What happened? The earth swallowing Korach and Aaron's budding staff. How does it compare with how God confirms Yeshua's priesthood? Check out Hebrews 5, verses 1 through 10, and chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. What can we learn about recognizing spiritual authority? The fourth question is, what does Aaron's active intercession teach us about true leadership? We can read this in Numbers 16, verses 46 through 48. And how does it reflect the heart of the Messiah? What does it mean to stand between the dead and the living today? Well, there's many dead people out there, right? Walking the streets. We need to intercede for them. Why did God cause Aaron's staff to blossom in Numbers 17, verse 8? What is the significance of a dead branch producing fruit? And how is this a picture of resurrection and Yeshua's life-giving power? The sixth question is, what responsibilities were given to the priests and Levites in chapter 18? And what does it say about the balance between holiness and responsibility? How do these roles point forward to the calling of believers in the Messiah? Seventh question is, how can we guard our hearts against the spirit of Korach? In practical terms, how do we nurture humility and servanthood in leadership and community life? I used to have a friend many years ago. We would pray together, and he would always ask God to give him humble ability, the ability to be humble. I love that prayer, and I pray that often. Maybe not often enough, but I do pray that. I remember that prayer, and I'll say, Lord, give me humble ability. The eighth one is, if we read Jude chapter 1, verses 11 through 13, why does Jude compare false teachers to Korach? What do these verses tell us about rebellion in the context of the early Messianic community? And the last question is, how does the example of Yeshua offer a contrast to Korach? So we can read Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. And how does the Messiah's humility inform the way we view leadership and honor in the body? In your own life, where might God be calling you to surrender ambition or control in favor of humble obedience? Thank you for joining us today, and Shabbat Shalom to all of you.